Life in the Middle Ages was brutal and dirty. If you were a soldier, it was even rougher than you can probably imagine. From rancid disease and no medical care to the hellish screams of your fellow comrades being slaughtered. If you didn't perish immediately, you risked being carried off as a prisoner of war. These really were the toughest times in human existence. You can forget Hollywood's glamorous portrayals of honor and glory in movies. As we dive into the life of a medieval soldier, imagine waking up every morning in a damp, cold tent, the smell of wet leather and sweat hanging heavy in the air. Medieval soldiers didn't have the luxury of a comfortable night's sleep or a warm breakfast. They had to be ready to move at a moment's notice. Their living conditions were harsh, to say the least. Cramped quarters, poor sanitation, and scarce resources made every day a battle for survival. Their armor, though a huge advantage, was a constant burden. Weighing up to 80 pounds, it was a testament to their physical strength and endurance. But it was also a psychological weight, the constant reminder that they were one misstep away from death or capture. The sound of clanging metal, the stench of sweat and metal, the feel of the helmet's weight on their shoulders, it was a sensory overload that took its toll. But not all soldiers had this privilege, as many of the leaders of the time didn't have the resources or time or patience to clad their soldiers in uniforms. They didn't even provide them with food or weapons. All of those things were the responsibility of the soldier. If someone wanted the prestige of fighting in a battle, that person had to bring his or her equipment. Soldiers often fought in the regular tunics that they used while farming, drastically increasing their odds of death. For these poor soldiers, death was almost certain. Imagine that someone slings a mace at your head. You certainly get knocked out, and if you wake up, you have a massive headache. Don't expect to wake up from such an injury, but if you do, you will probably have some severe brain damage. Skeletons that researchers have excavated reveal just how horrific and gory the wounds that people who died in battle actually were. One skeleton that was discovered near Stirling Castle showed repeated blows to the head that left 44 skull fractures, as well as upwards of 60 strikes across the rest of the body. Those who did not die in battle but received wounds probably died shortly after that. Without modern medical care, they could bleed out over the following days and weeks or find their wounds festering with an infection. They were often left to die on the battlefield because the chances of survival were so low and the risk of spreading disease was high. The soldiers who were able to return home usually carried scars that would be visible for the rest of their lives. Battle scars became a symbol of prestige, as those who survived the wounds that they received certainly earned bragging rights. There's no doubt that medieval soldiers saw some of the most brutal and inhumane acts in history. The screams of the dying, the cries of the wounded, the stench of death. It was a never-ending nightmare. How did they cope with the trauma, the fear, the uncertainty of it all? It's a wonder any of them survived with their sanity intact. Many soldiers were first and foremost farmers and peasants, especially foot soldiers who had no horses. They had to carry out their duties in the fields, or else they and everyone else in the village would starve. As such, there were certain seasons in which lords and kings would call upon their people to go into battle or embark on some other military campaign. Kings would urge people to pick up arms during the spring, once they had completed planting for the year. Campaign season was usually between planting and harvest, often during the summer months. Sieges could often last for weeks and extend well into the winter. These sieges were particularly destructive, as they often prohibited people from being able to harvest the year's food and therefore led to mass starvation. Soldiers who were called upon to travel long distances for battles frequently brought their wives, children, and other family members with them. It was not uncommon for the entire family to pick up and leave, particularly during the Crusades. Eckhard of Aurach wrote that during the First Crusade, men set forth with wife and child and laden with their entire household equipment. Of course, this practice meant that everyone faced the hardships of war, not only the soldiers. Sometimes the elderly and children made long, arduous and dangerous journeys to the battlefront rather than stay at home to take care of the farm. During the Crusades, it was not at all uncommon for the entire family to join the soldiers. Peter the Hermit was a monk who led a campaign to the Holy Land via Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. While there, a group of Turks reportedly were going within the tents. They destroyed with the sword whoever they found, the weak and the feeble, clerics, monks, old women, nursing children. Medieval soldiers didn't have the luxury of a morning routine. Their day started at dawn with a quick wash, a hasty breakfast, and a mad scramble to prepare for the day's battles. Training was a relentless process, honing their skills, perfecting their techniques, and building their strength. It was a never-ending cycle of preparation and execution for the trained soldiers. However, for the bulk of the army made up of peasants, they were often called last minute to fight. The historical context of medieval warfare is crucial to understanding these soldiers' daily lives. The backdrop of constant conflict, the struggle for power and territory, the rise and fall of empires, it was a world in flux, where allegiances shifted like the wind, and death was almost certain at any moment. Possibly the most dangerous element in medieval warfare was the danger of disease. People were already aware of biological warfare and frequently employed it by doing things like using catapults and trebuchets to hoist dead animal carcasses inside a castle's walls. They might even find a way to get a sick person behind enemy lines to infect the entire opposing army. Also, then there was the reality of the injuries that a soldier could receive, becoming a breeding ground for germs, and the person then transporting them back to his or her home. Many Crusader soldiers who returned from the Holy Lands carried back with them diseases that they had picked up. Even if they did not suffer from the conditions, they could transport them as carriers and thereby infect communities all along the route heading back home. Couple these realities with the fact that medieval hygiene was abysmal and sewage often ran through city streets, and you have the stage set for large-scale infections. The people probably had some level of immunity to the diseases that were common to their areas, but when soldiers returned from faraway lands and brought new illnesses, they were utterly helpless. And to top it all off, you weren't even getting paid for your service. Yes, it's true. Their pay came in the form of looting, which often included taking people prisoner and holding them for ransom. In 1415, following his victory at Agincourt, the armies of the English king, Henry V, accidentally took so many prisoners that he could not provide food or prison cells for all of them. To solve the problem, he ordered that all of them be executed. The total number of prisoners of war that he ordered killed is unclear, but some suspect up to 15,000. Your fortunes might be a bit better if you were a knight or some other nobleman, as you could be held prisoner with a ransom held over your head. If someone could pay your ransom, you could be returned home. However, your captors would probably take your armor and horse as part of their booty. During the 100 Years' War between France and England, taking prisoners for ransom became so commonplace that an entire marketplace developed. Prisoners of specific rankings were held for certain amounts and could be exchanged for each other. There were even rules for payment, agreed upon by both sides. As we reflect on the harsh realities and sacrifices made by medieval soldiers, we're reminded of the debt we owe them. Their bravery, their honor, their sacrifice. It's a legacy that shapes our understanding of warfare today. We remember their names, their stories, their triumphs, and we honor their memory.